Welcome to the War Academy channel. The Roman Legionnaire is, without a doubt, one of the toughest and most disciplined soldiers of all time. Being recruited mostly at the age of 20, they had between 20 and 25 years of compulsory service ahead of them, after which they would be discharged with numerous rewards. During all these years, the Legionnaire would no longer be subject to Roman civil law, to be subject to military law, this being much more severe. Trained under strict discipline, it was intended to make them soldiers with blind obedience to their commands, since the objective of the training was not only for the soldier to learn to use their weapons, but also to engender extremely tough combat legionnaires who would obey any order without hesitate. Regardless of their actions in combat or the years they had been in service, in which they would have already suffered enormous hardships, the Roman legionary was subjected at all times to harsh punishments that could even lead to death, for any stupid action that was against the regulations. It was the custom of many centurions to break sticks on the backs of his men while he was whipping them, and then ask someone to bring him another stick. The most common punishments for which they could be sentenced to death by their own commanders ranged from theft within the camp, to lying in court or homosexual acts with another legionnaire. In addition, they could also be sentenced to death for accumulating a couple of minor offenses. Evidently, falling asleep on watch, deserting the unit, or fleeing the battlefield was also punishable by death. A last quite striking reason that also led to death was the fact of carrying out the construction work of the camp without carrying his combat equipment. Although some soldiers decided to put aside their weapons while digging, this was declared a reason for execution, as they had to be prepared at all times to defend themselves from an attack. Regarding his physical training, it should be noted that it was also extreme. This consisted of long exercises with heavy wooden swords, in which the legionnaire practiced all kinds of movements in front of a wooden post. As many of you know, the Roman legionnaire did not train to cut with his sword, but to give small thrusts in which he only had to drive the point of his sword into the enemy. As the Roman historians of the time say, a thrust of our sword, even if it penetrates only 5 centimeters, is usually deadly. In addition to this sword training, the legionnaires also learned how to perform different formations, with which the legion could be deployed on the battlefield. Finally, and also very important, all the legionnaires were subjected to long and hard marches on foot loaded with all the equipment. The first-century historian Flavius Josephus described the training of the Roman legions as bloodless battles, and their battles as bloody clashes. Before analyzing what was the salary that these soldiers received and what goods they could acquire with said money, let's see a few last curious aspects. And it is that, in addition to everything that we have exposed, the legionnaire was not allowed to marry during his years of service, and if he had married before being recruited, this marriage was annulled when he entered the army. It was not until the end of his service, at approximately 45 years of age, that the legionnaire picked up his life where he had left off at the age of 20, and he was able to find a partner. Clearly this was something that was not strictly adhered to, and many were unofficially engaged to some woman. In any case, Emperor Severus abolished this regulation, and from the year 197 after Christ, all legionnaires in active service could marry. This norm, which had been in force since the time of Augustus, had the intention that the Roman legionary maintain the greatest possible link with the army, without anything outside of it being able to distract him from his functions as a military man. However, in practice this also considerably reduces the birth rate and the motivation that the soldier may have to defend his territory. Although, as we have recently said, many commanders turned a blind eye to this law, it was finally present for about 200 years. Once this introduction is done, in which we have been able to get a minimal idea about the life that the Roman legionnaire had in imperial times, let's see what he received in return as remuneration. The list of salaries and prices that we are going to give below is indicative for the 1st and 2nd centuries after Christ, since during the 3rd century there was great instability in the Roman economy, which had to be solved by Diocletian in the year 301 with his famous maximum price edict. Until the time of Julius Caesar, and definitively with Augustus, the Roman legionnaire had received only 450 sesterces a year, which was doubled to 900 with Augustus. Later at the end of that 1st century, he rose to 1,200 annually. This payment was made 3 times a year, giving the soldier 400 sesterces on each occasion. To give us an idea, the price of a small farm was 100,000. Seen in this way, it can be seen as a very miserable salary, even more so if we know that a lawyer could charge about 20,000 sesterces for handling an important case. We can compare the salary of the Legionnaire with that of the centurion, the latter being about 20,000 a year, or that of the main commander of the legion who received nothing more and nothing less than 400,000 a year. The best analogy we can make to understand this abysmal salary difference would be to say that if today a soldier earns $100 a month, the division general receives more than 33,000. However, we should not just stay with this, because this is simply the base floor of the Legionnaire, to which a series of accessories must now be added. In the first place, it was customary for each emperor to make a donation to all the soldiers of the empire when he came to command. With this, the new emperor gained the sympathy of his soldiers, on whom he depended to a great extent as the empire entered into internal crises. This payment became something annual, which was repeated on each anniversary of the proclamation of the emperor. In addition, and as if that were not enough, the emperors used to leave in their will that part of their fortune would go to the army, with which several thousand sesterces were redistributed among each legionnaire. But, if there was any real income that the Roman soldier received, it was from conquest and plunder. Every time a territory and a new fallen city were conquered, the loot was shared in large part among the soldiers who had participated in the operation. This was all very well during the first centuries of Roman expansion, but when the conquests ended and only the borders were defended, these revenues disappeared. In addition to this income, the soldiers could also receive some remuneration for having been decorated for having performed acts of extreme valor on the battlefield, although this was something very specific and affected only a small part. On the other hand, many day-to-day expenses had to be assumed by the Legionnaire, and the food they received or the repair of their combat equipment could be deducted from their salary, as well as money destined for various funds for the deceased. Finally, when the Legionnaire retired after some 20 years of service, he received a payment of 12,000 sesterces, this being 10 years' pay. In addition to this final payment, the Roman Legionnaire also received territory after his retirement and a modest lifetime pension, which allowed him to somehow rejoin civilian life, without starting from scratch. Something striking about this system that the Romans had was that each emperor was practically forced to match the money allocated to the legionnaires that the previous ruler had set, or even exceed it, no matter how bad the current situation was, if he did not want to lose the support of his legions. This measure can be positive in times of plenty, but when everything goes into crisis, it only serves to facilitate revolts, civil wars, and instability. In summary, we can conclude that the base salary of a legionnaire was slightly below the general salary that any civilian could receive, be it a baker, carpenter, or farmer, and that it depended largely on the extras that we have mentioned to be worth it as such. On the other hand, it is clear that Roman society was very unequal, and while a legionnaire earned 100 sesterces a month, the emperor spent more than 400,000 on a nightly banquet, or the price of a large estate in Italy was around 3 million. And what do you think? Do you think that the situation in which a soldier finds himself has changed during the last 2,000 years, or is it still similar to the Roman one? I sincerely hope that you liked this video about the Roman army, and for those of you who want to expand the operation of this army, I leave you in the description the program that we did live with Bellamardis talking about it, as well as the book that he helped us with this program called Legions of Rome. And finally, this is the end of the video. Thank you all very much, especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you in the next one. See you soon.